Let's have a playthrough of the sounds in Cinematic Pads 01. Remember, these sounds aren't just configured with Logic's instruments, they're also only using Logic's effects, so nothing is coming from outside the ecosystem of Logic. The first sound is called FM Hollow Pad, and it's an EFM1 patch that I've configured, which is just here. So let's have a listen to this. This is a very sort of harmonium-y, almost organ-like, quite pure EFM1 sound. It's Sunday morning. Okay, so it's also got this really nice sort of extended bottom end. And for me, it might be a stretch, but it feels almost clarinetty to me. It works very nicely doubled with winds this sound. Okay, one more thing to say is that you'll get a little bit more of the kind of FM quality if you engage the modulation wheel. So there, we're getting a few more overtones. Okay, so what I'm going to do is move on to the Plus version of this sound. Remember, all of the Plus versions offer you exactly the same sound, but then through a curated collection of Logic effect inserts. I deliberately stayed away from adding reverbs via auxiliaries. My feeling is that what you're going to want to do is bring these sounds into productions that you're working on already, and probably the last thing you want is to suddenly have a collection of reverbs that are adding to the reverbs that you've already configured for your track. So I've left those alone. There are no sends on any of these sounds. So here is the same sound through a bit crusher, EQ, ensemble, and pedal board solution. And there is just a little bit of the delay that's coming from pedal board. So this is a slightly warmer, more spacious treatment for this sound. It's a little bit duller, but it's got that kind of bit crushy, overtony quality, which I really like, with a little bit of just extra harmonic content at the top. Let's move on. Okay, the next sound is called I Want to Run. So you can hear all this kind of busy fizz that's coming at the top, and effectively what that's doing is it's coming from a fast LFO treatment for the ES1. I know you haven't opened these synths for years, have you? And yet they're really good for a whole range of things. So what I've got here is just a little bit of that treatment. And again, if I use the mod wheel, that effect is going to open up. And pads which offer this kind of movement can be really useful if what you want is something which is just going to start providing something a little bit propulsive. Okay, let's have a listen to the more sort of curated version of this. This is exactly the same sound all over again, this time with a bit of tremolo, which is going to be providing some auto panning from one side to another, and we've got some step effects going on here too. I'll open this up, we'll have a play, and then I'll talk to you about how I've configured this particular treatment. Okay, so there are a couple of things that are happening here. You can see the automation that's being applied at the moment to the filter cutoff, which again, effectively is this little three-step step modulator. So this is effectively designed so that every third 16th note or every fourth 16th note, effectively this little pattern of 3 will start all over again. So it's likely to provide some little cross rhythms against any track that you're working on in 3/4 or 4/4. So effectively the little stab, the first little step, is going to come around every fourth 16th note. Now, as always, if you ever want to kind of back down the effect of that, that's something that we can just do here with this depth dial. So the moment I begin to trim this, we'll get less of that movement. But what I've also done is to configure that so that that movement can be introduced via the X controller here. So that rather than having to automate this parameter, if you want to be in a position where you're controlling how much movement you're going to get, then effectively that's just something that's happening here. And I've actually inverted this movement. So the least amount of movement is over here on the right and the most is over here on the left. So you can see the kind of negative offset from a depth perspective. So let's have a listen to that. So effectively what I've done with this sound is to configure something which just feels like it has the potential to either be a very muted collection of little undulations or something which has the potential to kind of poke through a running sequence. So if you want to kind of blur that line between a pad and something which is more like a kind of sequenced moment within your track or a sequenced element within your track, effectively you can turn this pad into something which is offering movement. But as I say, there are also places within this XY pad where it's much more stable. Okay, let's move on to the next sound. So this is low mid pulse dust, and this is a sound which is using sculpture. Trying to think why I put dust in the title. So obviously what we've got here is this kind of really noisy sound with this kind of quite forlorn collection of little overtones that are poking out. It's really velocity sensitive. And because it's velocity sensitive, one thing I've done is just to significantly restrict how wide the dynamics of this sound can be from a velocity perspective. So in other words, what I've done is I've lowered the threshold, increased the ratio, and added a little bit of makeup gain, but effectively it doesn't matter how hard you hit this sound, its maximum velocity can't be above about, I don't know, 60-ish, which really means you can't play the loudest versions of this, unless of course you just choose to tweak the settings that I've set up within the velocity processor, at which point the whole sound will become more dynamic. So the more kind of plus version, the curated version of this sound, offers a variety of different treatments. Let's have a listen and then I'll show you what I've done. Just buried in underneath some winds, for example, that would just be an amazingly extra element, which I think might be quite beautiful. So what we've got here is some chorus. I've EQ'd this a little bit just to roll off a tiny bit of the low end. And then the movement is coming from the auto filter. So effectively what we've got here is this little up ramp, which is playing out over quarter notes. There isn't a lot of this, but the LFO movement is just effectively introducing some of the movement that we're hearing. And of course, I've deliberately picked something from a rate perspective that's going to be clocked to tempo, so that straight away, all of this movement is going to continue to play out at a speed that makes musical sense within the projects that you're working on. And what I've also done is to increase the stereo spread on the filter, so we're just getting all of that extra width. And then right on the end, what I've done is to configure a little chroma verb treatment. This is using the smooth space, a nice long decay time, really dense treatment as well, so we're just kind of getting all of this extra sort of universal width, if you like. So it's a really nice sound for just burying under things that have just kind of got the kind of wind-like overtones that are so prevalent in lots of sort of hybrid TV and film scoring. Nostalgic pulses. This is a sound that I've used within the course. This is effectively the pad that's being used within the main piece. And again, it offers this kind of nice throbbing kind of low-level pad sound. Again, works really nicely with winds. Again, there's a little bouncing little element to that which just pokes through from time to time, which I really like. Okay, and into the plus version. Okay, so the common theme that is emerging really is that the kind of movement is coming in these curated plush versions of these sounds. Plush, plus, although they are quite plush too. Okay, so effectively what I've done here again is to use Beat Breaker to create some time and therefore pitch offsets. Again, really subtle little moments, mix level of only sort of 49%, so only half the signal is being sent into these little pitch offset undulations. And then alongside that, what I've also got is some step effects treatments again. So again, what we've got is some gating, some things that are sort of just coming in and providing movement over particular parameters, including the mod effects, which I think are really interesting up here. And what I've done is to configure a collection of XY parameters as well. So again, this sound will move and evolve as you move around the XY pad. So these really nice little subtle undulations, I really like that sound. Okay, what I'm going to do now is to move on to the next one. This is Pitchy FM Thickener. Does what it says on the tin. So this again is using the EFM1. What I've done here is to put in a few things, a bit of stereo detune for a start. So effectively the pitch offset is just not quite stable. And we've got a little bit of vibrato here as well. But of course you can take this further if you want to, really easily. So in that direction, you're going to get into a much more kind of sci-fi-ish vibrato, but I really like pads that are just a little bit unstable from a tuning perspective. So I'm just hinting at that, and you can take it further if you want to. Again, a really pure FM sound, really useful in loads of different contexts. What I'm going to do is now to load the curated version, which is here. And I've continued that sense of slight unease from a pitch perspective, particularly in terms of the way that the pedal board treatment is using. So again, what we've got is this kind of extra chorus effect. We've then got some sort of spin, some sort of cabinet treatments, which are coming in as well, just providing us with a little bit of more overtone. And then the tie-dye delay, which is just this kind of slightly blissed out sort of delay, which is just a little bit wonky. And I've added another delay after that from tape delay, which is providing us with LFOs and some sort of pitch flutter, and the intensity again is something you could push up if you wanted to get more of that kind of slight unpredictability into that sound. So that's a little bit more kind of 80s. It's a really useful kind of pad sound to kind of put under things that are a little bit more strident. Okay, we've now got pulsing in harmonic. Again, this kind of slightly wonky, from a pitch perspective at least, just slightly throbby noise, which I think is really beautiful. Okay, and again, here is the version of that with some extra wonder. That works nicely up there as well. Again, what I'm heavily reliant on for this particular treatment is the Fat Effects plugin, which is doing a whole range of things. LFO movement, targeting both filter and cutoff. You can see all of those are animating because of the way that the LFOs are being brought into play. And again, I've configured some filter treatments, the bandpass filter. Sort of low cut end of that can be configured via the X-axis, and then we've got filter drive being a sort of controllable here on the Y-axis. I've also really gone there with distortion on this particular sound. A lot of the kind of overtoniness is coming from, is that a word? I've used it twice, is coming from the fact that I've added some saturation and some vari drive. So that's all happening here as well. And again, if you want a version of this, which isn't quite as all-encompassing, then of course the mix dial is something that you can play with. That's going to allow you to just effectively use this as a parallel processor rather than a full 100% mix treatment. Okay, let's move on again. So this is the short string tracker. Nice little cluster. Okay, so as its name suggests, the idea here is that if you bury this under any propulsive short strings, what you're going to find is you just get this little pulse on each downbeat, which is just going to give you a little bit extra. Again, really low level. It's a really nice way of just being able to add more movement with this kind of hybrid sort of approach. Here is the full curated version of that, which is just adding some step effects. Okay, let's just open that up and have a look at exactly what's going on in here. So I've got a few little lanes here that are doing different things to get propulsion into this sound. So we've got some filter cutoff movements, which is making the sound just rise and fall from a tonal perspective. We've got some gating, which is affecting the volume. And it's worth noting effectively that we've also got pan here as well, which is just providing some stereo movement and effect that's just left at the top and right underneath. So all of that movement is just happening as far as that is concerned. Now, if the clicks aren't to your taste, if you don't like them, then of course that's just something that we can do by turning off a couple of the lanes in here. So I think actually it's the pan movement that's doing that. Little bit from the filter, but not too much. So again, highly configurable from an interface perspective. And again, what I've done is to create a number of different sort of automatable, movable parameters mapped to the XY pad. Lots of fun. So again, you can see that all the modules are on. I'm doing things with distortion, obviously with the reverb, and that reverb mix amount is being controlled along the y-axis. So effectively we can dial in loads more reverb as we sort of come up vertically here. So again, really useful pad in its own right, but definitely something that works really nicely if you're working with fast, short strings and you just want to add more space and movement and this kind of slightly unpredictable electronic element underneath it. It's worth noting, by the way, that every time I've created a treatment for step effects that's new, you'll find that that's available as a preset in its own right as well. So even within step effects, this is just called JB Cheaps because it's providing these little cheapy kind of noises for us. So you'll be able to just load those independently if all you want is this little step effect treatment. Okay, we're going to move on again. So this is the Shy 80s chorus pulse. Don't be shy. Retro synth really is fantastic. And with some processing, Okay, so again, bit crushing. This time I think I've allowed myself to come down in resolution just a little bit more from the previous patch we looked at with some bit crusher. So down to 10-bit with a little bit more downsampling, which is where we're getting all of those sort of noisy overtones. Again, back those settings down, or at least back down the downsampling and increase the resolution if you want less of that. Within the auto filter, that's where the movement's coming from. This time what I've done is to create an 8th note LFO, which is being routed into the filter, which is providing us with a little bit of that kind of filter movement effect. But I'm using a random square wave shape, which means that those undulations are unpredictable. Sometimes they're really drawn and driven and we can hear them really clearly, and other times they just sort of back in. So rather than just a fixed shape, which is just sort of moving from one place to another, the great thing about random waveforms is they just keep you guessing and doing unpredictable things, again, with some enhanced stereo spread. And we've then got some fat effect, which is just going to be adding some extra weight to this sound, again using the mod effects and using the filters. And we've got some additional filter movement, again using the LFOs. And again, what I've done is to turn on the distortion a lot as well. I really like the distortion units within fat effect, but as you can see, nothing is crazy loud. And I've also just backed this down a lot. So overall, all of this effect that's coming out of fat effects is only operating with a really small mix level. So if I drive that a bit harder, you'll get loads more sort of energy into the sound overall. You can decide how hard you want to push it. And then there's a stereo delay on the end, just to provide us with stereo delay. Yep, well, don't say you weren't warned. Then we've got Siren's Pure Lament. This sounds sad. That's a really nice sound. Again, pitch-wise, really unstable. I love that. Again, particularly when doubling with other sounds as well. This would sit really beautifully under some ensemble strings, I think, just kind of in this mid-range area. Okay, where have I gone with this one? So again, ensemble. I've also put an amp designer treatment on this particular sound. So effectively this is passing through one of Logic's own amps. Then we're into a bit more sort of beat breaking. And again, the mix level for this is really, really low, but if I increase it, you'll hear what this is doing. So all these little flutters are coming from Beat Breaker, which I really like. And then on the end, what I've done is to add an exciter, which is just giving us all of this extra harmonic content up at the top. So if I turn off the dry signal for a moment, you'll hear exactly what this is doing. Everything you're about to hear is the harmonic content that's being added through exciter. So that is being glued on top of all of this. I really like those little sort of interval overtones that we're getting from Beat Breaker there as well. Again, all yours to play with in terms of where you want to make these settings sit within your tracks. Slow start throbs. Okay, you have to stick around for this one because it's not going to make a noise the moment I play it. I could listen to that all day. One thing that's really nice about Sculpture is that effectively the wave shaping element within here really is amazingly velocity sensitive. So what you'll hear if I play very quietly is that we get kind of no overtones at all. Get this amazingly pure throbby sound. And the moment I really hit it, we get these little metallic sounds that I just think are so beautiful and really, really unpredictable. Now again, because Sculpture can go pretty wild, what I've done is to again velocity process those so that again nothing gets too loud. But if you want to be bold, you could decrease the ratio here so that effectively the loudest velocities are allowed to be a bit louder. And you'll start to get more of that kind of top end quality that comes on the louder velocities. Okay, let's have a listen to where I took this sound. Okay, so what I've done here, as you can hear, is to make sure that distortion is a pretty significant part of this sound. So effectively, I've got an overdrive treatment here. Again, if it's too much, just back down the drive amount. That's then being taken into a true tape plugin. So again, this is just one of the stomp boxes. It's our true tape delay, again, giving us some reversed delays. Then what I've got is step effects, which are providing some movement. Again, a whole series of things here for you to play with, both on the XY axis, but also just in terms of the patterns that I've created. And then we've got Springbox, which is a tiny little spring reverb, again from the stomp boxes, which is just providing a little bit of spring on the end, which feels like it does nice things with those little overtony sounds that I was talking about. Okay, these pulses invert. Now the reason I call this sound this is because with the mod wheel, the pulses invert. So the shape of the LFO that is governing the way that we kind of get those spits on that sound, effectively is something that just turns upside down if you push the mod wheel the other way up, and that's being controlled here. So in other words, LFO2 is affecting the filter cutoff, and I'm using the mod wheel effectively to make sure that that inverts. So it starts one way up, and then we push it upwards, and it moves through the middle point where there is effectively no LFO movement into something which is doing something far more interesting. Okay, so you've got a nice opportunity to decide how much and what shape of LFO movement you want to apply to your sound. And again, the curated version of that sound. So that sound would work in so many different contexts depending on where you want the pulse and how you want that to happen. But what's really nice is that we get this really unusual kind of series of very subtle movements right in the middle where the LFO is doing nothing. Because of the way that the stereo delay is working with different delays on each side, we get this very low level, really syncopated effect around here. So if you don't want that LFO movement, but you do like the idea of this wide little undulation thing, which is just popping from one side to another, it's a nice place to go exploring. Okay, this sound is called Too Pure. So a nice sine wave based retro synth sound, which goes here. And again, step effects galore if you want to go and have a play again. Lots and lots of rooted different treatments just to get this sequence moving in different ways. And some pedal board after it again, which is just providing us with a different type of echo all over again. The blue echo this time. Okay, unstable constellations. So sort of classic repeating of the theme of the fact that the pitch of the core sound is pretty unstable, and then we get these nice little chirpy, light kind of little echo effects up towards the top end. Sculpture is extraordinary. Again, velocity is keeping that under control to some extent. Turn that off and let all hell break loose. Okay, and here is the curated version. Okay, so that's going into a really big space. Chromaverb is providing that, so this kind of bloomy treatment. And I'm pretty sure what I've done is to go there with some EQ just to make sure that the bottom end doesn't get wildly out of control. And what we've also got is the true tape delay. Again, as you're probably beginning to realize, I'm a real fan of this kind of reversed effect. But again, what we've got here within Beat Breaker is some pitch offsets that are coming from the sort of time area, which again, just providing these little variations. And what I've also done is to put EQ at the beginning again, just to make sure that the low end doesn't get out of control if you want to go and play some low stuff. But this patch, as its name suggests, is really about trying to create these kind of really celestial overtony effects, which I think are nice. Okay, warm, noisy bubbles. This is an ES1 patch. F minor. Okay, so again, what we've got is movement, which is kind of built into this sound. Again, what I've got is a random square wave, and I've clocked that to a nice fast 16th note. And what that's doing is to basically progressively sort of play around with the filter cutoff. And again, I can push that further if I want to. So I can turn it off towards the bottom end, more or less. So at low level, it's far more like a kind of regular pad, albeit it doesn't drop all the way to zero. And as a result of that, we're still getting some of that movement. And what I've done for the sub wave for this particular sound is to select a noise generator. So even though there's only a tiny amount of that being introduced, this is the kind of crossfade balance between the wave and the sub wave. You're just hearing that kind of noise that's just happening within that sound as well. Okay, and the curated version of that. Never let it be said that I don't look after the EDMers as well. Okay, and then we're coming on to our last patch. This is warm with a touch of cold. I really like the kind of unpredictability of the way that that sound sort of flutters around. Okay, and here is the version through all of the effects. Okay, so the way that all of this pitch and volume undulation is sort of being brought to the sound is through Beat Breaker, and people thought it was just a plugin for making crazy thing happens to drums. It's amazingly great for adding these kind of pitch offsets and these kind of wonky little moments, which is what's happening within this particular pattern. And then the other thing that's happening, I suspect, is that within tape delay, sure enough, we've got loads of LFO, loads of flutter rate, and loads of flutter intensity. That means that at high feedback levels, whenever just a little bit of undulation happens in the delay, it sticks around. So we get all of this kind of lovely wonk, or I just said wobbly because I think I tried to combine those two words. It's another new word. Okay, so effectively we've got all of that happening too. And at the very beginning of this, and I've done this on a couple of sounds, I'm using this rotor cabinet, which is just providing us with this kind of undulating, wide sort of cabinet kind of quality, which I think is really nice. Now, it's worth just repeating that whilst these sounds are designed to be used within your productions right out of this collection, of course, they are just so treatable. You own all of these plugins. They exist all within Logic, so just firing one of these up and just going in and either turning individual plugins off, adding new ones of your own, or just even going back to the synths that I've used to create these patches in the first place, just to tweak them, to make them more what you want them to be, is completely straightforward. Any changes you make, of course, can just enrich them and drive them in the direction that you want to go. But what we're going to discover as well is that they double so nicely with other sounds, either using a number of these different pads together to create a sort of monstrous sort of underscore kind of pad sound, but also when we start doubling them with orchestral sections as well, whether you're working with brass or with winds or with strings in particular, and the kind of propulsion that comes from a lot of the plus versions of these sounds double really nicely with the kind of propulsive pianos that we've looked at in modern scoring techniques too. So go and have a play with these sounds and make them yours.